probably hit the state elections website. Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon. Welcome to Community Comment. On Community Comment today, we are video streaming. So if you want to go to the video tab under dailydodge.com, you'll be able to watch a live video stream of today's program. You'll also be able to watch back if you would like. We're trying to do a little bit more and more of this, so hopefully we'll be able to keep this momentum going here going forward. Our guest on today's program, on the third Friday of the month, we'd like to welcome our representative in the Assembly in Madison onto the program, and today is no different. We want to welcome into the conversation State Representative Mark Bourne of Beaver Dam. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Oh, good afternoon. Great to be back. Nice to be back in studio. All these upgrades and some new furnishings, and you've got a laptop you're working off of now instead of all the notes that you used to have in front of you in the community comment room. This is high tech and lots of fancy upgrades around here. Looking nice.
You may hear some clickety-clacking during the conversation today. I think pens are quite quieter, but we'll get around it the best that we can. Well, you've changed a lot too, really, in the time that we've had a chance to sit across from each other, because it's been 14, 15 months.
More than a year, certainly. Yeah.
Certainly more than a year.
Yeah.
Well, you were on Joint Finance before that, but
sure.
Co-chair of Joint Finance. This is a big change for you too, as opposed to maybe when we started this program together. It's 4 terms in the legislature now for you.
This is my 5th.
This is your 5th.
Yep.
And your second go-around is your first go-around as co-chair of Joint Finance?
First as co-chair.
Yeah.
Third budget now on the committee, on the Joint Finance Committee. But first as co-chair, appointed as co-chair of the Joint Committee on Finance back in December when John Nygren left for another venture outside the legislature. And so this is my first full term as co-chair, the Assembly lead on our budget writing committee. And certainly some of the things are the same, working through a budget process on the committee for the third time, like I said. But certainly some things are different in that role. And but it's certainly, it continues to be a great opportunity to learn more about state government and how it impacts our families and communities in lots of different ways. And there are so many things in that budget document that just, there's a lot of the big stuff that we always talk about: education spending, transportation, health and human services are huge billion-dollar budgets. But then there's lots of, small areas, tiny areas, things that we've been working through in our first few votes in the last couple weeks of the committee, votes now on the budget. And a lot of those things don't affect a lot of folks, but they affect whatever area they affect. Some businesses, a few people, if that's your area, if that's a part of, either your business or where you work or your community is affected by it, it impacts people all over the place. And that's the big thing with our budget document is, unlike other legislation that may affect just certain pockets, certain areas, certain sectors of a community, the state budget affects everyone in the state of Wisconsin. That's why it's a huge document. That's why there's a lot of debate and discussion and, public input and work throughout the legislature, work throughout the executive branch to craft that document and to make sure that it's a 2-year, spending plan, and that we're investing in the priorities of the state of Wisconsin with resources that have been provided by the taxpayers of Wisconsin.
So interesting to hear you say you're learning about the state of Wisconsin. We talk a lot about, education being a lifelong pursuit and, the importance of always, educating yourself. Having been in the legislature for 8 years, it's interesting to hear you say that you are still learning.
Definitely. And I would say in 2 ways that I would highlight there. One is there's always new things. So there's a new issue. Maybe technology is challenging us, or the broadband is something where we're learning new things as the feds have come out with their new rules for the ARPA funds on what level of broadband connectivity, the 100 they talk about versus the 25.3. And I'm not an expert in this field, but I'm getting familiar with the numbers and how it impacts the funding and how these things are accomplished by the telecoms that do this work, and what things can be done by towers and satellites, and what things need to be hardwired, and how much that costs, and how much we can do, and how we serve areas, and how this impacts the funding. And that's something we wouldn't have been talking about really in my first budget, a few years ago. So there's that. Things change, and so you learn new things. Plus, it's a giant state. It's a giant budget document. I mean, this document that the governor proposed was 1,800 and some pages. So you get into some of the smaller minutia of state government that, unless you had a reason to learn about that, like a constituent reached out to you on this topic or something, you might not know a lot about it because it's a small budget or it's not something that normally gets highlighted. But sometimes those things rise to the top in different years too, and then you get a chance to learn more about that. So certainly every budget I've discovered new areas of state government to learn about.
920-885-4446 is the phone number if you've got a question or a comment for State Representative Mark Bourne. Perhaps it's about the current state budget process or his role on joint finance. Maybe it's a general question about legislation that's making its way through the Assembly. Maybe even a question about stuff that's making its way through the Senate that might come to the Assembly. He might be able to pivot on that.
Sure.
920-885-4446 is that phone number. 1,800-page document that you received from the governor. So, when we hear the political side of it in the news about throwing that out and starting fresh, are you truly throwing that all 1,800 pages away and starting fresh, or is it more of a kind of section by section, you're kind of zeroing things out but keeping the general framework? Is it literally throwing it all out?
In this case, we really did throw it out. We did in our first votes in the committee, I think 3 weeks ago now. Technically what we did is we've replaced the budget bill, that was the bill proposed by the governor, the 1,800 some pages, with a substitute amendment. So we wrote an amendment that completely replaced his language. And what we did with that amendment was went back to the base budget. So that's current law. That's what we're operating under right now. This is what the legislature and Governor Evers agreed to a little less than 2 years ago when we did the last budget. So that's what we've decided to use as our starting point. And there were a lot of reasons for that. Some of them are the governor included an incredible amount of policy in his budget bill. That's why it was 1,800 pages. I don't know where ours will end up. I think last budget we were in the 400, 500, 600 page range. That's probably where we'll end up again because we'll be more focused on appropriations, on the funding of state government, not on big policy changes that require a lot of language to explain what you're doing when you're creating a new department or a new program or something. That's better, we feel, spent in the bill process where it works through the standing committees and things like that. Another reason that we did not work from his budget was it was really built on sand. It had massive tax increases that we have no interest in pursuing right now because we have a large surplus in Wisconsin. Our economy is in good shape. We're currently operating with where we're at in the budget process right now with about a $2.5 billion surplus. So we have money to spend on investments and priorities. We do not need to raise taxes. He had over $1 billion in tax increases and then massive spending tied to that. So also then there was the big welfare expansion with more funds and more spending tied to that. So when we looked at the document and said there's so much policy in here, there's so much things that are built on this unrealistic approach of massive tax increases, let's just go back to the basics, back to where we were 2 years ago. We agreed with Governor Evers on the current budget, so let's start there and work from there. So that's what we're doing. We're hopeful that as we rebuild it, some of the things we took out, we'll put back in. There's areas of agreement. We did some of those yesterday in tourism. We matched the majority of the tourism things the governor was looking to do in our action yesterday, and that's just one example. So there'll be a lot of things like that. Election security, we matched the positions yesterday with the Elections Commission on what the governor was proposing in his budget. So it doesn't mean we're not doing any of Evers' stuff. It doesn't mean we're not working with him at all. But it means that we needed to start from a base budget because his was just built on unrealistic things that was too hard to work from in a reasonable way to help us build a responsible budget moving forward with this. Like I said, we're in a good spot financially. The state is in some of the best financial condition it's been in a long time. We have both current general fund surplus as well as the projected revenue growth in the next 2 years of, like I said, $2.5 billion at this point. We are waiting on our regular reestimate that usually comes out the end of May, but will be delayed a little bit by the delay in tax collection this year by the federal government. We'll get that in probably the second week of June. really because of how strong the economy looks like now. I think a lot of us expect it to be even a little better, so we'll probably be even higher than that $2.5 billion. We also have the largest rainy day surplus probably in state history, certainly in recent history. It was, zero 10, 12 years ago, and we're almost to $1 billion. I think when this budget ends, we'll be in the 900 million range for sure. So we're in a positive financial situation. We're in a good spot to make investments and priorities, a lot of the same priorities we've talked about before on this program. We'll probably talk about some of them in the next hour here. And we're also in a spot to, I'm confident, cut taxes again and return some of that money to the taxpayers because we've got a surplus. It's taxpayer money. And we've cut taxes every budget that I've been in the legislature, and I think we'll have an opportunity to do it again in this budget.
920-885-4446 is that phone number if you've got a question or a comment, and we will go to the phones here on AM 1430 WBEV and hear from our first caller of the day saying, good afternoon, welcome to Community Comment. Hi, you're on the air. Can you repeat that question, sir? We weren't quite able to hear it.
Oh, yeah, we've talked about that before on this program back near the election, that Joe Biden won the election. Yep.
Do you feel that Wisconsin is going to follow Arizona and have a recount? Yes or no?
I have to admit I'm not exactly familiar with what's going on in Arizona as far as I'm assuming this is along the lines of election and investigating the election outcomes. We will certainly have a number of things in Wisconsin that will analyze the election. We've got an audit going on right now of the elections with our independent audit bureau. The Elections Commission does things that are required by statute of auditing 5% of the machines. That's required by law in Wisconsin. There are investigations that are going on in different municipalities.
So you're not familiar with that. Now you feel that on January 6th, Trump incited the riot, yes or no?
I really don't have any information as to who did what as to what happened in Washington D.C. Sure, I represent folks here in Dodge County area in Madison, working on state government issues. I'm really not focused on. Well, I really listen to the news on local radio more than I watch it, but and read local paper and stuff. But I'm aware that occurred on January 6th, certainly, sir. But I have really no information on that topic for you.
Do you believe that homelessness is a problem in Wisconsin?
Homelessness?
Well, there's certainly homelessness issues in Wisconsin. Just yesterday, which when we talked to some of our actions yesterday in the committee, we voted to triple the housing grants for homelessness here in Wisconsin.
That's not what was reported. It said Republican focused down the money used for homelessness.
Yeah, well, the governor proposed a lot more, is what the reporting was, and that's accurate. I mean, the governor, as I talked about a little bit moments ago in the budget, the governor had massive tax increases, massive spending increases, spending at record levels, and we will craft a more responsible budget. And part of that was to fund at triple the current level the homelessness grants that goes to local communities and nonprofits that run day and 24-hour shelters and things in Wisconsin. We did not fund all of his initiatives in homelessness. That is correct.
Do you believe that Donald Trump, the ex-president, is going to be convicted of crimes?
Yeah, I really have no knowledge as to what crimes he's being pursued for or what he could be convicted of. I really have no information on that sort of thing.
No information, so you don't want to know the story.
Sorry, not something that's in my purview.
Well, thank you for your answers, and you have a good day.
All right. Thanks for the call.
Thanks for that call. We have another caller hanging on. We'll go to the other phone line and say good afternoon. Welcome to Community Comment.
Well, good afternoon, Greg, and good afternoon, Mr. Bourne. How are you doing today?
I'm good, and I'm getting my piece of paper ready because you usually have multiple questions, Craig. So go ahead.
Thanks, sir, and I hope you don't mind. I'll ask my usual. I got a million, but I'm only going to ask you three, and I'll hang up and listen to your answers, sir.
All right.
The first couple are based on the recent census. Do you have any feel for any major changes in Wisconsin legislature? Does the census, does that only affect federal, or does that actually affect state as well? And then the follow-up question on that is, redistricting, do you foresee any changes if there's been a major population shift? And then the next are kind of with your new finance committee position. Are state dollars and federal dollars, what are they based on? Is that on population, size of county, size of your area that you represent? If you just go into that a little bit, and then if you could talk about, I understand you were just on a recent tour of, talking to some of your, the people that let you in and been in several areas and stuff. What were some of the major concerns that you dealt with and talked about, and did that give you any insight of what are the main concerns for the people that you represent? I'll hang up and listen again, Mr. Bourne. Thank you so much. Craig, have a great weekend, sir.
You too, Craig from Horicon. Thanks for the call. We do appreciate it. Why don't we tackle one of those questions when we're going to have to take a break?
Okay. So on
Your
the
choice.
on the first one, we'll try to take an order, I guess.
And we'll answer all three of them eventually.
Yep,
We'll just
yeah.
take that break first.
So on the census question, we don't have all the information yet on the census stuff. That's going to come out this fall, but there have been some preliminary stuff. We saw some congressional changes, and he asked, does that affect state as well as it does the federal? And it does, because all of our districts are based on population. So if you've got areas like Dane County, for example, is growing much more rapidly than most of the rest of the state. So as they go to craft the assembly maps, the assembly districts generally will have about 55,000 people in each district. So if the population of Dane is growing a lot more, that's going to make those districts, smaller geographically because of the population. It's also, like last time, you saw the maps kind of shifting away from Milwaukee because the population was dropping in that area and people were moving out more into Ozaki and some of those other counties. So you saw the districts kind of get a little bit larger in the suburbs of Milwaukee because of the population growth. So you'll see that sort of stuff in the maps, and those will be worked on over the next year or so. And they will have to meet all of the standards that are set forth in federal law and federal case law. Population is certainly a key part of that, though, and that's where the census will impact those maps.
All right. Our guest is State Representative Mark Bourne at Beaver Dam. We have a couple questions that we're going to bank here for after the break, but we also would invite more questions. The phone number is 920-885-4442. Questions or comments. Maybe it's about activity in the Assembly and possibly in the Senate stuff maybe coming over to the Assembly, as we said earlier, or stuff that's going on in joint finance. Maybe there's something that you would like to see your local legislator address or whatnot. 920-885-4446 is that phone number. We'll take that break and be back here in just a few minutes. of Beaver Dam. The phone number, if you've got a question or a comment, is 920-885-4446. And we've got a couple questions banked here. Feel free to ask more than one question too. We apparently don't have a limit, but other than the end of the show.
The time, yeah.
So we covered the question about the census, and did you, as far as redistricting is concerned, we've covered that. When we talk about the Finance Committee in general, and we look at that maybe based on population, which is where the second question from Craig from Horicon was going, and the role of state and federal dollars. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, and it's, in some ways when he was asking that, I almost thought if he was focused on a specific area, I could answer it better, because the truth is how the funding goes to places differs from topic to topic, funding issue. So for example, some of this federal money now, it's whatever the way the federal government in the bill, so like this ARPA stuff that's coming in now, it's how they prescribed it. So I don't know all the details of how they prescribed it, but I know one of the things that they tied the money coming to the states on was your unemployment rate. And that's why Wisconsin got a little bit less than what we were expecting, because we had lower unemployment and our economy wasn't shut down as long and stuff as other states were. And so that's like one, federal bill that's got a lot of money in it, and part of how they tied that. Sometimes it's tied purely to population. And so they might, the federal government might prescribe funding for transportation and say it's based on your number of road miles, or it's based on the population of your state. Or so really the answer is it's however the bill, the legislation prescribes it. And so we do the same thing at the state level. Sometimes we do transportation is another example, where we do local road aids based on per mile. So how many, if your township has X number of square miles, that's it goes into the formula, and whatever, if we got $10 million in there, it plugs into all the square miles, and you get that percentage based on your square miles. But sometimes we might do public health programs based on population. So you get, $10 per person to use towards, public health education. And I'm just making up numbers now. I'm not pulling actual numbers. It's just more as an example of how these things work. And again, then that's all set up on however the legislation prescribes it to be. So there's no magic formula on how this stuff works. It's more from whatever the bill, if in the case of a budget, however we put that language in the budget to say how it would work.
And Craig referenced the listening sessions that that you've had around the community, around your district here, the 39th Assembly District in the state of Wisconsin. What have you been hearing out there?
So I would say both on the local ones and the ones I did all around the state, you certainly hear current normal themes, I guess you could say, things we've heard before, things that are always some of the hot button issues: education, road funding, healthcare. Those are things that we're usually talking about. Those are major parts of our budget, so it understands why people are interested in those and why those are important to folks. We spend a lot of money in Wisconsin, and other states do as well, on those topics. You also, especially when I get out of my district and in other parts of the state, it's always kind of fun to look for the regional issues, the things that you don't hear everywhere, the things that maybe aren't talked about in Madison as much. When we were up in Rhinelander for our public hearing for the committee, we had a number of folks up there talking about forestry and the logging industry. Not something people talk to me about in Dodge County, but up there, that's a major employer. That's a major part of their economy. And so it's nice. That's one of the, I think, important parts of getting the Joint Finance Committee out on the road show, as we call it, to get into different parts of the state and hear about things. Because it's not that we don't hear about forestry in Madison. Obviously, they have a lobbyist and things that work on those industries. It's an important industry in northern Wisconsin. But to go up there and visit and see, a giant logging truck in the parking lot, that's not something you see in Madison. It's not something I see around here. To have folks that actually work in the industry, be able to come out closer to their home and talk about the importance of that, that's the kind of stuff that we look for as some of the things to highlight, to remind us that, the budget, as I said before, impacts everyone throughout Wisconsin, and it impacts us all in different ways. And So we have to remember that, tourism is another example of an important part of our economy. But in some parts of the state, it's more important than others. In some parts of the state, tourism, like Door County, tourism is a major part of their economy. Here in Dodge County, it's important. We've got some great tourism stuff here, but we've also got a bunch of manufacturing and other things that are a major part of our economy here in Dodge County. So it's not as much focus as it is in other parts of the state, like Wisconsin Dells or Door County. And so it's important to be reminded sometimes of those different things, especially for us representatives that are working on the budget committee to craft this document for our entire state. Because certainly my default is always, what's good for Dodge County and my little part of Washington County that I represent, because that's my primary job, is to represent those 55,000 people in the state legislature. But now I have a secondary role on the budget committee as well, to work with all of my colleagues who represent all of Wisconsin and to figure out the ways that we need to do things to make sure that we are taking care of all of our priorities throughout our state, even if, the two I cited might not be top priorities here in Dodge County. They're still important parts of our economy in Wisconsin.
State Representative Mark Bourne, our guest here. That phone number, 920-885-4446. We'll take a break and be back in just a few minutes. And our guest, State Representative Mark Bourne in Beaver Dam. That phone number, if you've got a question or a comment, 920-885-4446. And we've had several good questions so far in the program, including the last one, which was about listening sessions and what you're hearing out there. And maybe tying this into the first caller, are you getting a lot of questions out there about national issues that are, we've got a lot going on the national level right now, and certainly have in recent history. Are you getting a lot of that when you're going out on these listening sessions as well?
Probably not as much at the listening sessions, because I think folks were pretty focused on the state budget at those. But we do get a lot in the office. I do get asked a lot when I'm out in the community about national issues. And in general, I don't spend a lot of time on those, but especially now during the state budget process, where I'm spending, the majority of my time in the Capitol, and we're very, busy with the state budget process. I don't, spend a lot of time monitoring some of those national issues, as some folks may. And also, I think sometimes there's confusion. We get a fair amount of contacts in the office where people think we can help with federal issues, and so, we just quickly point them to, with my district, it's split between 2 congressional districts, so depending on where they're contacting me from, we point them to Representative Grothman or the, new Representative Fitzgerald down in the 5th, or to one of the U.S. Senator offices, so they can help them with those federal issues. But we do get a lot of, we get actually a lot of contacts in the office where people want me to vote for H.R. 125 or something like that, which is of course a federal bill that I don't know. Not only do I not know what the bill does, I have no ability to vote on it. I have no ability to, do anything with it. It's just not in our house. And so I think that sometimes when people see on the news or hear on the radio about a bill and they're not sure where it is, they just kind of, have to try to figure that out. So we try to help them, like I said, connect them to their congressperson then, so that they can get the either their opinion on the bill to the right place, or their question if they need help with a federal agency or something to the right place. And I do sometimes get, folks on a phone call that, still think that there should be something I can do about it, even though it's a federal issue. Like, well, can't you talk to them or something? And it's like, well, I can, but just the same way you can. It's not like I get a vote or something. I mean, I can certainly call my congressman, Glenn Grothman, and tell him my opinion on an issue, just as anyone else can. And I, encourage folks to do that, to contact me on your state issues, because that's my role, and I like to hear from folks on what's important to them in state government. And I think your congressman wants to hear too what your concerns, your issues, whatever are on those federal issues. But we just gotta try to get folks to the right place so they can get the right help.
We've got a couple callers hanging on. 920-885-4446 is that phone number. We'll go to the phones and say good afternoon. Welcome to Community Comment.
Hey, this is Craig Powell. I got 2 questions. One is actually first going to be for you, Craig, because today when Craig was on, you said Craig from Oregon, and you used to always say Craig from Lowell. Is he relocating?
Yes, we are pleased to announce here on AM 1430 WDEV that one of our most loyal, longtime listeners has relocated down the road a ways. No, I think, does that mean he moves districts too? If you're in Lowell, are you in the 37th? And if you're in Horicon,
Yes.
Are you in the 39th now?
Yes. Yeah, so Craig has moved into God's country, you could say, of the 39th Assembly District now. That is correct.
Well, there you go. Right. The bustling metroplex of Horicon, for sure.
Yeah.
And Craig, I needed your assistance on this here. I mean, we work well in the basketball stuff, so I need your assistance on this question for Mark, because I don't know how to properly explain it. But it was on your news today, and it was on the state news today about how the Democrats are complaining about, I believe it's federal money that the Republicans have been hanging on to for the last couple of years, and not using it to help everybody out here in the state, and why they're hanging on to it.
I'm going to guess that's rainy day funding money, perhaps?
I think, yeah. I think I can help you out, Craig, because I heard your news this morning, and I
Yes.
think what he's referring to that I heard in your newscast, actually Ninja reporting this morning on
Yes, it was
AM
Justin.
1430, and I think it was actually from your statewide network too that you were reporting it
Wisconsin
from.
Radio Network.
Yeah, was about homelessness funding that we did in the last budget that is in the Joint Finance Committee supplement, and so. What that means is we sometimes in the budget process, we might do that again this year, is put some funds aside under the control of the Joint Committee on Finance to fund some future initiatives, because there's plans in the works to try to do some legislation. We talked about not having all this policy in the budget. So sometimes the way we can work around that is set some money aside because we know someone's working on some policy initiatives outside of that. And there was a homelessness package that was part of, this goes back a few years to actually then Lieutenant Governor Clayfish. She was the chair of this task force on homelessness. They had some initiatives that they wanted to accomplish to work on this issue. And so there was a package of bills and we put the money aside, and the money aside is the question. The Dems want that released. Unfortunately, last session, the package of bills passed the Assembly, but it did not pass the Senate. So that package never became law. That was the money was set aside to fund those initiatives. So that's why the funds haven't been released, because the bills never made it out of the Senate and to the governor to become law. So those funds could be appropriated for other things, but that was what the purpose of those funds were, and the purpose never came to light because the bills did not pass.
Yeah, Senator John Erpenbach says Republicans have been sitting on the homeless funding since it was signed into law in 2019. Democrats saying those funds were needed for, during, and after the pandemic, and Republicans hurt Wisconsin for no reason. You seem to be indicating that there's nothing you could do with those funds.
Well, we could, as I said, we could use them for other things. So we could put them into other homelessness initiatives like the one we did. But they were originally there for these bills that were going to change these programs and implement them in a different way based on these recommendations from my understanding of this task force. And I'm certainly not an expert in this area, but that was what the budget discussion was of why those funds were set aside. So the Dems, like I say, would like us to use them for other things. That the committee has not taken that action at this time.
Is this tie in at all to the fact that the governor's wanting to go it on his own when it comes to the federal funding that's come from the stimulus? Is there some headbutting going on? Is this another example of bipartisan or partisan wrangling going on in Madison?
Well, it's certainly an area of difference of opinion or disagreement. I don't think it's tied really to the federal funds in any way. This is a very specific thing that had some legislation tied to it. And it hasn't been accomplished in the way that it was expected to be, so it's not moving forward. Those funds will lapse to the general fund at the end of the budget, just as they do as a standard process thing. And they'll be used in this next budget for other initiatives. We can certainly, I guess, if you wanted to tie them together, you could say we could be using some of those funds in the next budget for the action we took yesterday to triple the funding in the homelessness initiative that we did do. But as pointed out earlier, we didn't do everything the governor asked for. We made some investments in some areas that we thought were important.
What areas were those?
The homelessness stuff?
Yeah.
Well, there's that specific grant program that we tripled, and then the other initiative is an employment initiative that has a local match to it, and we reduced the local match to try to get more folks to buy into the program, because the program wasn't as successful as we hoped. And we think this is a really important program because the program is trying to match, to connect folks that are homeless to jobs so that they can get back on their feet and get back to renting places and so that they don't get trapped in the system. So I would say those were the two biggest initiatives that we focused on yesterday.
Okay. Caller?
The state general fund is invested in a variety of different ways, and so depending on, this is all managed both by the investment board. In some cases, parts of that fund goes in there. Parts of it are just managed by DOA, and so at different times, some of it is invested in earning interest. Other parts of it are not. They have to make cash flow. It's a lot of money, so there's a lot of moving parts to it. And in some ways, I've probably already just tried to describe it more than I'm qualified to do, because it's pretty complicated, and we've got a bunch of accountants and lawyers at DOA that manage all that for the state, and then we've got a whole investment division at SWIB that manages those investments, and certainly they would understand that in a lot more detail than I do.
Is it borrowed money that we're talking about? Is it like in a municipality? I'll cover Beaver Dam, and they'll have their CIP, which as a Beaver Dam councilman, you certainly know about. If suddenly a project gets scrapped and pushed to the next year, that borrowed money either doesn't get borrowed or it is already been borrowed and it's sitting there gaining interest. Is it a situation like that?
Not in the case of the topics that we were just talking about now on the homelessness stuff and things like that. That's just general fund, tax collection money. The state does borrow for some things. We borrow for some transportation projects, capital projects, things like that. But on that, we really, because it's so large, we don't borrow in quite the same way that the municipalities do, in my experience, where they'll borrow a lot of their CIP at once, intending to do it, and then if they do miss a project or delay a project, like you said, the money sits there maybe in an interest-bearing account for a bit. The state borrows in sections, so if we're going to borrow, $2 billion or something in a biennium, they're borrowing at several $100 million at a time, so they're really doing it to, project to project. If you had a project that quarter that you didn't do, you would just grab the next one and use those funds. So they don't sit on a lot of borrowed cash for very long, and not to say that municipalities do, but they wouldn't have it for a full year, because they're just doing these things a couple times a year, and they're doing enough projects that it all flows through pretty regularly, pretty fast.
Hey,
all right. Thanks for the
Appreciate
question.
Call. You too. I think we have another caller hanging on patiently. We'll try going back to the phones and saying good afternoon. Welcome to Community Comment.
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon, Marilyn.
One of the things that seems to be a common theme at the listening session locally, and I suspect is the common theme across the country, is we do not have enough workers to fill the positions that are out there. And it seems to be encouraging to any company that wants to grow, and if we don't have people for them, and there's no robotics or something that would fill that need, that they're going to go to another country in order to do their growth. And I haven't heard any politician from any party coming up with a solution to that. You can encourage people, I guess, to have more children, but that's going to take a while before you get a result of that, and I don't think that ever get as many as we need. So what solutions are being discussed?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Marilyn. And she's right. It is a huge issue. It is one of the biggest issues facing the state of Wisconsin right now, and she's right nationally as well. It's probably the biggest economic issue challenging Wisconsin right now. I've been having lots of conversations with it the last few weeks. Marilyn's right. She was at my last listening session with Senator Jagler. I think a week from today. We were at the Beaver Dam Chamber. It was talked about there. I talk about it with businesses every day. I did a little shopping this morning in town, talked to a store owner about it in here in Beaver Dam. And some of the things, well, first of all, there's no easy solution to this. I mean, I think she kind of led to that too. Birth rates are, lower and things like that. But there are a few things that we've tried. I think 4 years ago, but it might have only been 2 years ago. Sometimes my state budgets blur together on me, but I think it was 2 budgets ago. We put some money into the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation and asked them to run a talent attraction program. We want them to recruit especially veterans, because we've got a lot of veterans that retire from the military middle-aged after they do oftentimes about 20 years and are looking for a second career. And Wisconsin's a great state for veterans. We've got a lot of good veterans benefits here. And these are a lot of, people, men and women with good experience, good work experience that could come in and work in a private sector job. Also seeking to recruit young folks, young people to come in and raise a family here. Wisconsin's a great place to, live, work, raise a family. And so we created that initiative towards the end of the Walker administration. And for whatever reason, the Evers administration does not like it. They are not pursuing it. The funds are sitting there unspent. And so that's unfortunate. And so we would love, I talked with Secretary Hughes a little bit about this a few weeks ago at WDC. We would love to get that program going. I'm not saying that that's magic that's going to solve all our problems, but it could help. And that's what we're looking for, is ways to try to help. I think another thing that will help in a major way, and this is something, an initiative that we announced in the legislature this week, is we have a bill coming. Other states are doing this as well. We're asking the governor to stop taking the enhanced federal benefits for unemployment. Right now, with all the massive money the feds are putting in unemployment, you can make more money staying at home. And we're basically paying people to stay home when unemployment is low and our businesses throughout the state are desperate for workers, we can't have anybody sitting on the couch. We got to get everybody that can be, every able-bodied person that can work. We need to have participating in our economy right now. And so I think that's an important part of, making sure that, it's not getting rid of a benefit program. It's going to keep it at the level it was before the pandemic. Certainly if folks need unemployment assistance for a little bit as they transition between jobs or something like that, that's what it's for. But all of these enhanced benefits that they keep extending are paying a lot of benefits to folks to not be engaged in our workforce right now, and we can't afford to have people not participating. We just don't have the numbers, as Marilyn said on the call. We just don't have more folks are retiring at a much faster rate than our folks that are coming into the economy, and so you got to have everybody participating. And it's certainly something that, like I said, I hear from employers all the time. And she's right as far as, like, I think she mentioned something about like robotics or some of this stuff. I mean, we are going to be a lot faster than people might be comfortable with at a lot more self-checkouts and kiosks to order your food at certainly the fast food restaurants and things. You're seeing a lot of that in the bigger cities with the high minimum wages like Seattle and Chicago and stuff already. You can only use a credit card. You can only, communicate with the computer to order your lunch at a McDonald's and things like that, because there's just not enough folks left to work at these places. And when I have local businesses tell me that, they can't even get applicants. They keep raising their pay. They can't get people to apply. If they do get applicants, they might get a couple dozen applicants. They'll call them all back. They might get 2 of them to actually come in for an interview. So it's a major problem, and I wish we had, there's a couple of solutions that I mentioned that are, part of the solution, but there's no magic here either to do some of this stuff. So it needs to be a combination of getting people back into the workforce, trying to attract some new folks to Wisconsin. Maryland's right, we can't legislate this, but birth rates would help a little bit if folks engage in that. And some of it's going to be technology then, the kiosks and then the robots. And I mean, I had one business owner telling me today that they've got robots in like McDonald's in Chicago that make the food, and you just have someone there to make sure the robot keeps working, that doesn't malfunction or whatever. And there's a robotic arm frying hamburgers and stuff. And, that might be the future of some of this.
We also have a number of industries that the jobs that are available are not jobs that people want to have. The corrections is a big one, and that affects Dodge County. And, frankly, I think that we need to look at what we're doing in terms of incarceration, because you can only build so many more prisons if you still have no workers to care for those who are incarcerated. Then we didn't solve anything. And just like the young lady that was at the listening session said, issues in the healthcare field, is because there are laws that require them to have a certain ratio of caretakers to patients, then they're being forced to hire people who aren't adequately caring for the residents of these homes. And that's a very sad thing. And frankly, I agree with you regarding the veterans, but I worked for a nonprofit a few years ago that dealt with the Senior Community Service Employment Program, and I worked with quite a few veterans. And what the country has done to them is horrific, and the number of people with agent ones or other major issues, they are not going to take jobs somewhere because they can't. And the emotional trauma that they experienced and everything to it just is a huge rest on that being any more than a little bit of a solution. But thank you for your answer.
Thank you for the call. We appreciate it. In context of unemployment and the money that's going, one of the things I've been hearing from I want to say a nonpartisan economist is that it's also a supply chain issue when we're talking about some of the challenges that we're facing. And don't we kind of already have this idea set up that if there are more jobs than job applicants, that's where the laws of supply and demand and that's those salaries should be going up to compensate for that. Isn't that the process that we should be looking at?
Well, that's what's happening. I mean, just look around. I mean, salaries are, I mean, you can just look at the banners that are hanging up in businesses in town. If you've watched them the last couple of years, they're going up quite a bit. There are, manufacturing jobs right now in this town that are over $20 an hour on posted banners that I see in the community that were $18, $17 just 2 years ago. So that is certainly happening. Some of the service industry stuff that used to be lower wages, as I talk to business owners around town that say, we were, 2-3 years ago, our average employee, because a lot of the service stuff is a lot of part-time too, was, $8, $9, $10 an hour. Our average employee now is $13, $14, $15 an hour. That's a huge jump in 2 or 3 years. But you're seeing some of it because we're starting to see some inflation, and we're probably going to see more of that because of what's going on with federal policy right now. But mostly it's just the demand of the market. You're right. The market will drive the wages. That was what we talked about all the time when there was these debates over minimum wage as well. And that's exactly what's happening now. And that's good for folks looking for work and good for folks looking for a new opportunity to maybe change jobs, that there is a much more competitive market. There are employers are having to pay more to get help, especially good help, and that's good. There's always the concerns about inflation. If as we see like meat prices rising quite a bit in the stores right now, if that starts to get away from us, your $22 an hour job is only buying what your $18 an hour job was at some point. That becomes an issue. And so hopefully we won't get too far down that road, but time will tell. But yeah, no, that's exactly what's going on. I mean, I see it in this area. Like I said, just looking at help wanted signs and what the job ranges are on them.
920-885-4446 is that phone number. Be happy to take your phone calls after the break. The phone number is 920-885-4446 if you've got a question or a comment. We got a caller hanging on the line, I believe a repeat caller from earlier in the program, if I'm not mistaken. We always welcome that as well. We'll say good afternoon. Welcome back to Community Comment.
And the cutest guy in the world, too. Hey, Ms. Bourne, just kind of listening to some of the questions and stuff. A lot of the stuff is coming from national and broadcast news. I know there's like C-SPAN and stuff like that for national news. If people, if you watch some of the national news, you're going to get basically you're getting opinion. You're not getting facts. You're getting opinion. So, first of all, you're in I give you credit. You signed up for a job that has basically no positive feedback. You still want to talk about the good things that are going on. And I appreciate the fact that you're looking at lowering taxes and all that. And one of these things I wish you could just have a show and say, hey, these are all the great things we're doing for Wisconsin. But, especially when it comes to jobs, taxes, everyone talks about Florida, Texas being great, California, New York being terrible. Wisconsin is just Wisconsin, and, we have wonderful sports teams, just not champions, but, it's kind of one of those things, it's where you want to live, too, Hey, it's a great place to live, but, what we do have winters, but it is in Texas or Florida. So, where can people go to find out the truth about our legislation and where it's going, where it's looking for? You could be one side or another, and, a lot of the questions are opinion questions that you get. I've tried never to give you opinions, an opinion question. I'd rather have that. But where can people go to find out the truth?
Other than this radio station, of course, Craig.
That's a good question, and Craig beat me to that. I was going to suck up to the radio station too right away, but no. Certainly, some of your local media is a way to do that, and sometimes though things get complicated, and even in your local media, sometimes there's some confusion. Sometimes I could give Craig a call when I hear a story that they pick up from their statewide network and say, I don't think this is quite what we did yesterday, but let's talk about it. And they're always very good about that here too. Craig's always been good about okay, let's get a quote from you to kind of clarify it or something from at least the perspective of the local representative of what was being accomplished. So I think local media is one. I think that it's getting harder to find local media though. There's not as many local radio stations. There's not as many local papers. The local paper here doesn't cover at least me individually as much as they used to. They cover it more with their statewide stuff. But there's still some local weeklies in the district. Now that Craig's in Horicon, you could check out your local weekly paper in that region. I think they do a fairly good job running some of my columns where you can see at least, you can hear directly from me talking about what I'm doing in Madison on your behalf. I think that's important. We do a weekly e-update, so if you do email, you can sign up for that with my office on my office webpage. A lot of people do that. A lot of people tell me they like it. We keep it relatively short to 3 or 4 stories a week of what's going on in Madison that we can update with you directly. We try to do more of that on social media now too, if you're on Facebook or Twitter, so that you can hear some stuff directly from me as to what I'm working on your behalf. Because I agree, it's important. There isn't a lot of areas that this gets covered anymore. And as more of it's covered from the national or statewide perspective, it's just going to be at a very high level on the controversial issues. And, that's why I think programs like this are important too. We certainly don't cover it all in a monthly visit here. We run out of time. And we do have to cover some of the, more sensational hot button issues because that's what people are talking about. But we do talk about other smaller things that we accomplish. I talked about, pretty much every legislation that I've been lead author on over the last 8 years on this program over the years. And a lot of those are bills that were brought to me by local folks. It's their idea of how it impacts their business or their community or whatever. So I guess the shortest answer is, Craig, you're already doing it. You're listening to, your local radio, to a program like this where you can hear directly from me, from, questions from your local news director, or in today's case, could have been almost a cardboard cutout of him and all of the folks out in Radio Land helping him out with good questions along the way. But either way, it's directly from me.
I'm glad I don't get paid by the question today.
Oh,
Wisconsin, all right?
yeah. Yeah, and I forgot that was early in your question about C-SPAN, because C-SPAN's the national. We do have Wisconsin Eye here in Wisconsin. If you subscribe to local cable, that is a channel up in one of those, I think, 900s or what. Or also, if you're online, you can go directly to their webpage and watch. You can watch live coverage pretty much all day, Monday through Friday, of whatever's going on in the Capitol, and they rerun a lot of that stuff during the night, and you can watch. If you wish, and if you find that channel, Craig, you could watch live coverage of every one of our executive budget sessions. They carry all of them live.
995 and 363 on Spectrum.
Especially with this news story about the homelessness thing, like you said, it came up here. It came up before the pandemic. So, I mean, there is an explanation, but if all you listen to is the 30-second news clip, you don't have all the information. But if you watch the legislation, you would have all the information, and you could make your own decision from there, correct?
You'd have all of it and probably even more than you would want, but you would get to hear a lot of discussion and debate on these issues, yes. Thank you.
Is your job boring?
Hardly ever boring. I mean,
I'm talking about what we would see, like if we were to watch the legislation.
Oh.
When you're sitting there for 8 hours, 12 hours, overnight sessions, I mean, that's got to get grueling.
yeah, it can get, there's some fatigue sometimes. It's sometimes the floor sessions, are not like, fun things to watch because it's a lot of the repetitive, a lot of the same debate over and over again. Mm-hmm. And it's not issues. I mean, if you're watching a floor session, the debate that's there is not anything we haven't heard before. It's the same arguments that were made in committee. It's the same arguments that are made in, emails and documents that we get on the topic. So it's not necessarily new stuff. But when we're working like through this budget process, I mean, there's tons, like I said at the start of the show, there's tons of new stuff all the time. There's things, so it's not boring. At times, it's exhausting, maybe with long hours and things like that. It's difficult at times. It's a lot of fun at times, and for the most part, it's people have been asking me a lot now since I've the co-chair. Is it what you were expecting? Is it what you were hoping for? Whatever. And it's like any job. It has its good days. It has its bad days. It has its triumphs. It has its failures. It has its challenges. Whatever. And most jobs are like that especially that aren't, exactly the same every day. And so I'm sure it's no different than, the news director and whatever your new giant title is here. You've got some days where it's like, wow, I wish I hadn't come in today. And other days, like, things are going smoothly. We got another award-winning community comment
I didn't
wrapping
even have to ask
up.
a
And
question today. This has been as easy as it could be.
So it like anything, it's got its good days and bad days.
In fact, we do appreciate our callers. We got another caller hanging on the line at 920-885-4446. Happy to go back to the phone lines and say good afternoon. Welcome to Community Comment.
Hi, thank you. I get most of my information from the newspapers, so I'm wondering, you mentioned earlier in your show that we have a lot of excess money in the budget. Why is that not going for road repair and bridge repair, both local and statewide?
Yep. And this is certainly one of the top issues that we hear about at the listening sessions. I would say it is the number one issue I heard about on my local ones, which is why last budget we made the largest increase in new revenue in a generation into the system, and why we made increases both to the local road reimbursement that I talked about earlier in the show, that's per mile, but we also created a brand new it's called the MLS program. I can't remember what that stands for off the top of my head, but that's also focused just on local roads. And I think that you will see more investment in that in this budget. There's also a lot of federal money coming to the state that will play a role in this. And We just a few weeks ago put additional money into the local transportation. The way it works with the federal transportation money is under current law, anytime the federal funds fluctuate by more than 5% of what was projected, up or down, the Department of Transportation has to bring a plan to the Joint Committee on Finance on how they're going to spend or make up for that deficit in the plan. And we had a plan come a few weeks ago to the committee, and we had some local deficit because gas tax was down, because during the pandemic people weren't driving as much. So we had some lost revenue there, but we also had a significant increase in federal money at that time. That was some pandemic money. And the federal money more than covered the shortfall, so the plan that we approved took the extra federal money, which I think was about $50 million. But I don't quote me on that number, and if you want it for a story, we can get it from my office. But it took the additional money and put it all into local roads and bridges, much like the caller was talking about. So we did a little bit of that with some surplus in the current budget. I think you'll see more of it building on our increases from last time because it's a top priority. I know something that I talk with local officials about at the county, city level. Been having some exchanges with Mayor Lewin on that topic recently. I know it's a priority for her. They're doing a lot of road work here in the Beaver Dam area.
Yeah, and to maybe more specifically follow up on the caller's question, we're talking about $1 billion in the rainy day fund. Should we have $1 billion in the rainy day fund when we do have some of the transportation and infrastructure issues that we have in the state?
I don't know if the rainy day fund is where we need to tap because we do have a considerable surplus, and so I think we'll continue to put more funds into that. I said, but one of the things that folks need to be careful about, and this is something that this is part of the debate right now because of the massive amounts of federal money that are pouring into the state, and we've got just incredible amounts coming directly into education, childcare, local governments, state governments. One of the things that the money that's the discretionary money that the governor has that we wish he'd be more willing to work with us on how we invest those funds and how it works in conjunction with our state funds is broadband. The federal money can clearly be used for broadband, but much like roads, we can only do so much. We only have so many companies that can do this work. We only have so much raw materials available to do. We can only do so, if we just took which I would not suggest, but you asked about the rainy day fund. So if we just took that full $1 billion, I don't know that we could even get enough road crews to use that in the next couple of years on top of the $6 billion transportation budget we already have in this state. So that's why we look at more incremental, because you see some of the changes. Like right now, I don't know the full details of this, but I know that part of South Spring Street's tore up.
Yep.
But my understanding is they're doing the utility work because they couldn't, and this is from a story that I heard on local radio, they couldn't get the road work done this year.
Until next year, the other part of South Spring Street.
So, how much more money can we actually give these municipalities to do projects when there's delays already happening that go back again to Maryland's call in some ways on workforce? Because I'm sure the road builders would be happy to hire as many employees as they possibly could and take more of these projects, but they can only get so many employees and grow so fast and then have the materials to do that. And then you have the inflation issues. I mean, if we're dumping so much money into construction, whether it be broadband or road construction, that we're just driving up the price, well, now we're doing less miles for the dollar. So that's not helpful either. So it's part of it's trying to find the sweet spot. And so, yes, local roads are behind in some areas more than others. And so I certainly hear that from the caller. That's why we made new investments last time. That's why we brought new revenue into the system for the first time in a while. That's why we're going to continue to grow that. But we do have to grow it incrementally in a way that the system can handle. Because if we take broadband and just throw hundreds of millions at it and there's no one to actually bury the cable or install the towers, well, then we haven't accomplished anything either. That's why we got to work with all the sectors of this.
I do believe we have time to squeeze one more call in here in the final 4 minutes of this program. We'll go to the phones and say good afternoon. Welcome to Community Comment. Hi, you're on the air. Or maybe not. Unless John Kraft says we have 5 minutes left, but apparently not a call. So if we could use that time to maybe elaborate on, or maybe if we haven't really had a chance to get to anything maybe you wanted to, but I think one of the things that a lot of people in rural Wisconsin want to hear about is how the broadband situation is going. Are we starting to see some movement? It seems like this is a bipartisan issue. That at least maybe the nuts and bolts aren't bipartisan, but it does seem to be kind of going in a positive direction.
Oh yeah. We've got a lot of stuff going on. I mean, there's a lot of federal money that's focused just on broadband that's been coming into the state the last couple of years. We put $44 million into the state budget last budget, so the budget we're operating under right now that's working. We've got a local Dodge County got a grant a couple months ago, maybe now. The time kind of flies, but certainly talked with Nate Olson at Dodge County about these issues a lot. Just talked to him the other day, and so there's stuff going on now. And then down the road here, we've got federal funds again. I'm confident we're going to put some more state money into it in this next budget. We were going to take it up yesterday, but we decided to hit the pause button because the governor just press release announced that he was going to use $100 million of the ARPA funds. He'd said he was going to use 150 to 200 of it in the past. Now yesterday he mentioned 100 of that, but still no details. So we're still, but they indicated, the administration indicated that maybe June 1st there would be some details on that. So we wanted to, again, like I said before, we'd really like to find ways to make sure that the federal money that the governor has and our state funds are working together on some of these issues where they can. And so we don't want to put state resources into places where the federal money should be used. If there's ways that we can supplement it, let's do that. So we're kind of waiting for the details on that. But I think there's going to continue to be a variety of investments. And part of the concern, like we did a bill a few weeks ago that asked the governor to use $500 million of the federal money. The federal money can be used for 4 years as ARPA funds. So we were saying $125 million a year, because we were trying to work with the telecoms and the industry to say, like, what's a good number? What's something that you think you can actually manage, that you can, your folks that need to work on this, the companies you need to hire, like Michaels Corp, they do a lot of boring and pipelines. They have, based here in Brownsville in the 39th Assembly District, how much capacity do companies like that have that can actually bury the fiber optics that are needed to do this, at least that way, or how many we build the towers. I think they do that too there. And, there's lots of companies that do it. Obviously, I wanted to highlight one here in the 39th Assembly District. But so that's all part of the discussion. It's not just like how much money can we make up a number and just throw money at it, but like what are, serious investments. The part of the question on broadband is how much do we need to get it done, to get, 99% of the state on a proper level of broadband. And so we work with the telecoms on that and say, what do you think, industry? What does it take? And that number has generally been in like a $750 million to $1.5 billion range. So it's a big range. But then that's matching funds. So if the state, puts, $500 million in and it's matched in our grant process by mostly the private companies, and I think we talked about this last time I was on a little bit, that's $1 billion investment then over the next few years that should get us pretty close to that goal of where that range is. And so that's kind of the focus, is to get this federal money, state resources working together, and working with our private partners, because they're an important part of this. I mean, the state's not building this infrastructure. Businesses that whether it be construction businesses or the telecoms themselves are doing this work. But I think it's heading in the right direction. And I think the biggest thing, even more than money now, is going to be resources to do it, the work crews and stuff, that how fast they can get this stuff done over the next few years. Because as we know, I mean, the pandemic exposed some of this. It's a major issue. We need to have access to this stuff for our schools, our businesses, and things, to be able to have this access to technology. It's not really a wish thing anymore. It's more of a need for families.
Well, we'd like to thank you for directing your resources over to our humble radio station today, and our listeners for making those calls and asking those great questions. We really do appreciate it. A reminder, if you wanted to watch this conversation today, you can go to the video tab at dailydodge.com. We'll, of course, archive this in audio form as well under community comment tab on the audio page at dailydodge.com. Do want to thank our guest for joining us once again, State Representative Mark Bourne of Beaver Dam. Thanks a lot.
Good to be here as always.
That's going to do it for today's Community Comment.